Welcome back to Beneath the Grandstand, episode 18. Ryan Fenton here with Alex Lohr. Sir, how are you doing today?
We're doing good. School's about to start-ish, whatever school looks about like for you and your kids or your friends and brothers and sisters. It's getting real. We're diving into this. What will this fall look like? We're about to find out.
Yeah, I think a simple answer, if we're talking from a cross country perspective, my word would be not consistent. But I have a few friends in education, and my mom was a teacher for almost 30 years, and she retired a couple of years ago. So I know folks in education, heart goes out to them. Folks with kids like yourself, Al, heart goes out to you guys as well, trying to navigate all this stuff. So it's
heart goes
a
out.
wild
My
time.
sister's a first grade teacher. She's a first grade teacher, and she has like 30 kids in her classroom. And so just imagine being on a Zoom call with 30 children. All right. So long story short, teachers don't get paid enough.
And from a college perspective, I mean, it's obviously all over the place with college sports. When you look at that, I mean, sports in the fall, for the most part, with the exception of, the SEC, the Big 12, the ACC, most all at the D1 level have canceled or postponed their seasons to the spring. I know D3 is one that's just completely canceled fall sports. They won't even try to reschedule that. So a lot is happening. NCAA recently came out this past week with some updated info that eligibility will not be lost for kids if they do compete in anything this fall. Essentially, they're going to get eligibility. So which sounds like a good thing for student athletes, but then we're kind of in a situation we were in the winter and the spring with universities now will have to fund these extra years for kids. So it's one problem solved, which actually creates another, and so we're going to be in that boat for a while. So not a great thing for running fans that are looking forward to fall cross country. Not a great thing, but I do have to give a shout out to some events that are actually happening now. Yesterday, the Sunset Tour in California. FloTrack has had some Continental Tour events, gold level events that have taken place, and a few more coming up, and potentially another Sunset Tour event. And then looking ahead, we got the London Marathon. The elite race is happening, and Flo will actually be broadcasting that to outside of the U.S. in about 98 countries, a number in Europe, in Australia, and our neighbors in Canada. So looking forward to that really exciting elite race that they have on the schedule. So something to look forward to. And then for non-running fans, Tour de France. If you're in Canada, Flo's got it exclusively on Flo Bikes. So a quick plug for our friends from the cycling world. But that's not where we're here today, Al. We're here for the Fats and the Furious, episode 2 within our Beneath the Grandstands pod here. And we first launched with Adidas and our friend Nick Roche and Reed Fisher, who gave us insight on the launch of their new technology. And today we get to feature our friends from Asics and really dig in with Emma Bates, pro runner who a lot of folks know out there, and Chad Mullavey from the product side, and really excited to hear about kind of their experience in this whole shoe race and getting product out there.
Yeah, really, really excited to chat with these guys today. And I think it allows this community to understand, the people behind these products, right? Because it's important to remember that, right? We see the results and we see, these sexy photos that come out, but we have to remember the sweat and time and innovation that have gone into every single shoe that you see on somebody's feet was touched by a lot of people, and a lot of work was poured into that. And so hopefully this series gives them the respect they deserve. So I'm excited to talk about the MetaRacer today. The MetaRacer is Asics, carbon plated racing flat. There isn't a person out there that doesn't have, if they don't wear Asics now, they at least have some great memory of an Asics shoe that was part of their running life and that they loved. I myself, I loved the Cayano for a really long time, and I think everybody can kind of align with that. You've had at least some soiree or some close relationship with Asics at some point. Their new shoe now that's kind of joining this arms race is called the MetaRacer. It's a little bit different from a silhouette perspective when if you saw it on the shelf. It actually does not kind of like rub up against the actual limits of stack height. So its stack height is actually 30 millimeters. Its weight is 6.6 ounces, and that's for a men's size 9. And it comes in at a retail price of $200. So same as the Adios Pro, but less than the Nike Next Percent. So really excited to dive into this today. Chad and Emma give us some amazing insights, and it's interesting that some of their insights actually kind of cross each other and align really well in a cool parallel from a product and athlete perspective. So we're really excited to dive in today with elite marathoner Emma Bates, 7th at the Olympic trials, and on a heck of a new upswing and a kind of a renaissance of her career. So Emma's going to join us from Boise, and we're gonna get to know the MetaRacer. All right, and now we're joined by the one and only Emma Bates. Emma joining us from Boise. Not quite from her mountain retreat that we're all jealous of, that we saw on Instagram, living that tiny house, secluded life, but posted up at it sounds like a grocery store right now. Tell us what's going on, Emma.
It's more than a grocery store. It's a total hangout spot. I got the whole patio to myself right now. It's a great thing. But yeah, we only have satellite internet at our house out in Podunk, Boise, in the mountains. So this is our solution. We got to come into town to actually, do normal 2020 things.
Oh man. Well, I think we're all still pretty jealous of the tiny home life. I mean, you're almost a year in now. We got to know what's been the biggest hurdle to living off the grid.
So many things. First of all, we still don't have running water. It's going to cost like $30,000 to drill a well, and they don't even. That's not even guaranteeing they're going to hit water. And so we have this huge hole in the wall with a tank that we fill up manually. We have all these gallon jugs, and it's really hard because we usually have a natural spring about a mile from our house that we can fill up jugs. Well, it ran out. It ran dry this summer. And so we've been going into town to fill up our gallon jugs, our 5-gallon jugs, and then lugging it up back to our house. And so water, people should not take it for granted because it is the real deal. If you have running water at your house, you are living in luxury. We're basically glamping where we're at. It's like camping, but just more glamorous since we have a bed and, we have Wi-Fi kind of. So no, it's a lot of fun, and it's beautiful out there though. We've been kind of hit with some fires this summer too. So that's been kind of a scary realization that, we had a fire that was no more than 2 miles from our house a couple weeks ago. And just knowing that a lot can go wrong is probably the scariest thing about living up there. So just keeping your neighbors close and just everybody around you just aware of your situation, and just keeping in contact with people is the best thing. So, but yeah, we've had a lot of our friends up there, and they all fall in love with it right away and just want to live up there. And we're like, yeah, anytime people want to come up, we have a spare loft. And so it's a tiny house, but we can fit a good amount of people in there. We've done it. So if you want to come up anytime, you guys are welcome. Post-COVID, obviously.
Right. Well, we appreciate the invite. And it sounds like we might have to lug lug our own water up there. Like you're mentioning lack of water, fires around you. So like, where are you literally just lugging water from like the Albertsons up to your place right now? How are you getting water?
Yes. We're filling them up in the jugs and then putting them in the back of our pickup, and there you go. Then we have water to do dishes and shower and drink and, feed our animals. So
Okay, so we need to find a race that posts at least a 30K prize money, maybe a little more in case you don't hit water. So we got to put that prize purse out there.
yes,
That would be the carrot for Emma over the next season.
That'd be glorious.
So Emma, just put you on the spot on this living. So now that you've been there for about a year, knowing what you know now, living as just someone with like a regular day to day is one thing, but as a professional athlete, knowing what you know now, would you still choose to live off the grid?
Yes.
Full time. I should say full time.
Yep, without a doubt, I would do it, because that is something that changed my career. It changed my life. It changed my whole outlook on just everything that I, again, took for granted before. And it made life really hard at first, and it was just really challenging. And it still is really challenging. But again, it makes you really live in the moment and be mindful and understand kind of the greater meaning of life, and knowing that the amenities are not what make you happy. It's just the being in nature and being more in tune with it, and just it's really a good time to slow down and delve into who you are and who you are as a person and what you want out of life. And that was the only way that I could do it, at least in the moment of moving here. We bought the house without even seeing it, but we just knew that my husband and I wanted to live in the mountains, just because we always love going out there and just being one with just who we are as people, and forming our relationship and just becoming stronger within ourselves. We knew that was what we wanted to do at the time. And it was a total 180 from Boston, which was just hustle bustle all the time. Just busy. And again, just to really be forced to slow down, not have, the TV, and not have all the distractions, and just kind of be within ourselves, was a game changer for me. And that's when I really started to understand why I wanted to run. And I wasn't preparing to run as well as I have, and to garner another sponsorship. I thought I was just gonna, run for fun and kind of do my own thing and work, some few odds and end jobs until I really figure out what I wanted to do. But the more I lived out there, and the harder life was to, just go through the daily chores and everything of garnering water and like all the, normal things that, you again take for granted. Running became easy, and running became a stress reliever and a total place where I can, again, connect to myself. And yeah, I think I complicated my whole life, and I complicated running way too much. So to be out there and everything being so simplistic, it just is what I wanted and what I needed at the time. And it still is what I want right now. We definitely are looking for a space closer to town, just because we're forming a team, IDP. Nice. And so to be closer to people, I'm also starting to realize how much I love people and being around a team and being around people that have the same, like-minded motivation and dreams. And I don't think I would have understood that if I had just been in a city for this whole time. Like, I think being out there, being in solitude for so long, it made me really realize that I'm not as much of an introvert as I thought. And I actually really do feed off the energy of other people. And so having the nature is amazing. We'll always have that place, even if we do buy a place closer to town, because that will be a nice little retreat. Whenever I feel like I'm getting just, bogged down by stress, that's a good place to relax and to escape to.
Nice. So a strong recommendation for the off the grid living, with a caveat of just know your water situation. So it's yes. Good. Well, it's interesting. You've gotten to really focus on running and sounds like kind of keep things relatively simple. So it's like, hey, where am I going to run today? And another reason we're here talking to you today is is partly about product. So it's like, where am I going to run? What shoe am I going to wear? Right. And so I want to get into that a little bit. But before we do, just kind of setting the backdrop of your events, when it relates to the marathon and what's happening in that distance right now. When you look at the 2-hour barrier being broken, the women's barrier of 2:15 being broken, a world record. A lot of people didn't know when they'd see it go down. As a professional athlete in this event, how are you processing seeing everything that's happening in the marathon and these major barriers starting to be broken?
It's amazing to be in the sport while this is all unfolding, and it was only a matter of time before technology kind of caught up with what our bodies can do, and the goals that we all have as runners. And so it's really cool that there's this shoe race, and it's exciting. I think sometimes it does take away from the actual runners, in the sense of, I think that a runner could have broken too without all the shoe technology. Maybe it just wouldn't have been so soon. But I think we need to welcome all of the technology into the sport, because that's where world records get broken within the span of time. And I have felt amazing running in the new shoes. I feel like my body is starting to work the way it's supposed to, rather than trying to force it through a shoe that maybe just doesn't quite fit. So that's been my experience anyway, is just running in these shoes just causes my body just to biomechanically do what it's intended to do.
So you say technology caught up to kind of the runners, right? And there's this shoe race, and these barriers would have happened, but maybe this is expedited a little bit. But like, what has that race been like from your perspective? Because a lot's happened, right? And this is a significant moment in technology when it comes to running shoes. So what does that mean when you say the shoe race, and how did you fit in to kind of seeing that all unfold?
Yeah, it's I ran the Chicago Marathon when Bridget broke the world record of 2:15, and I didn't see her the entire time, so I can't attest to whether or not her shoes were better than the shoes that I was wearing. But I think that through my experience, it has been an incredible time for, again, just an athlete sponsorship relationship, just being able to go back and forth and be like, this is what works, this is what doesn't work. And I think that at least with Asics, it maybe took longer than some other companies, but they're so methodical. Everything is very thought out, and they want to get it right the first time. And so going back and forth with the companies, I think has increased way more, just because the shoes are more important now than maybe they were 5-10 years ago. And so to be able to be a process, to be able to be a part of that process has been really special to me, because I feel like the Asics footwear people are so good about it. And Chad, you'll hear from him. I can't say it as eloquently as Chad probably will about just how much the meta racers have just changed the game for Asics athletes. When I start talking about technology, I'm just like, the shoe fit good, I run fast. So I'm gonna try to articulate just how much it means to me, but again, it's so cool to see just from where they started. I first came in contact with the meta racers. It was before I ran my half marathon at New York City half marathon last April. And I was like, this is it. This is the most amazing shoe I've ever put on my feet. And they're like, hold up, this is just a prototype. It'll get better. And I'm like, there's no way it's going to get better than this. I just ran a huge PR, and this is the shoe that I want. But then they kept sending me more shoes and more shoes. I'm like, oh my God, this is even better. Oh my gosh, this is even better. So it's so cool to see that transition of, I thought this was amazing, and it's become what it is today. This is the best shoe I've ever put on my foot for racing, for doing workouts. I can't think of where they're going to go from here. I know they will, but I just don't get it. It's incredible to me. So again, I'm so happy to be a part of the process anytime I can.
On cue with the shoe. For those that
Nice.
can't see, if you're listening to audio, Emma had that shiny shoe ready to roll.
Oh yeah, here it is. So beautiful. That sunset red.
Oh, cool. Sunset red. I like the term.
Yes.
I think, Emma, I think what, what's so interesting to, maybe some people removed from like the elite athlete conversation is, what was that like to interface with the brand at this like kind of apex, right? And it's like, you were literally in the race where you saw Bridget Kosgei smash this record, but you knew that there was something coming hopefully soon. Like, I guess, what was the communication like where it was essentially like, don't worry, Emma, we're coming out with something great and Emma wants the shoe right now. Like, how can you stay, like, how can you trust that process? And what was the conversation like to, I essentially validate your patience because something is on the way?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've always believed wholeheartedly in Asics. I ran through Asics my entire high school career. And then obviously once you go to college, you have to run in the shoes that you're sponsored by. So I was running in Nikes at the time because that's what Boise State was sponsored by. But when they told me that shoe was going to come out, is before I even signed with them. I just knew that I believed in Asics so much, and I knew that they were going to surpass, every other company because they always have. I have never put on a shoe that I haven't liked with Asics, and so just the reassurance that it's going to happen. And when I first got the first prototype, my confidence grew more and more. And I knew that by the time that we needed to really get rolling, by the Olympic trials, that they would have something really special. And they did. They churned it out. And again, it was a lot longer of a process than I realized. I didn't know, being on the outside when you're not, an athlete, an elite athlete, you don't know what goes into it. And so for them to believe in it so much from the beginning and to be trying to, explain to me just what an impact this was going to make, I wholeheartedly bought in. I was like, okay, I'm all in with you guys, and I trust that this is going to happen when it needs to happen. And they pulled through again. I mean, the Olympic trials was the most important, time for, the next 4 years for an athlete. So I was pleasantly not surprised, but just this was the moment, and they made it happen when it needed to count.
Emma, for the people at home who might not, have access to a Meta Racer or maybe haven't run in an Asics in a while, to get like your taste, to get like your perception of how a shoe should feel, I think it's important to like ground everyone in like what sort of footwear you enjoy in the first place. So could you give us like maybe a little snapshot into, these are the shoes that Emma loves wearing, right? Like, what is your footwear rotation now? What was maybe like, when you were at Adidas, I used to set footwear out. Like, what was the go-to shoe then? I think this would give us like an insight into like how you perceive like what a good shoe is.
I am such a cushy trainer runner. I just love the foam and the squish and just the comfiness of a shoe, the plushness of the upper, and traction. Obviously, living in Boise, I'm on the trails all the time, so I need something that is going to withstand, all the dirt and rocks and the, all the up and down of trail running. And so I love the Nimbus. Those are my go-to. I run in those wherever I am, doesn't matter. So those are the pair of shoes that I'm going to put in my bag, to go on a trip. Those are the ones that are always going to be there for me. So very reliable. I would say that's very similar to the Adidas. I'm not very well versed with the Adidas, but the Adidas Supernova is very similar, I would say. Where that was a shoe that I always wore to kind of go for any kind of run. Just didn't have to think about it. Just put those on and good to go. But I definitely, my favorite trainer of all time is definitely the Glide Ride. I've never put on a shoe quite like it. It has this incredible rocker, and I love running on the pavement with it. Whenever I'm trying to do maybe like a quicker paced, easy run kind of thing, like a pickup, those are the shoes that I go to for that, that push off, that just the feedback of the shoe is amazing. So I like that one for the more up-tempo, easier days. But for every workout, I'm going to go to the Metacracer, of course, even if it's the road or the track. I love the shoe for those hard efforts. Again, I think that some shoes aren't they're not made for the track just because they have too much cushion. I feel like this shoe has just enough cushion where you have the response to be able to wear it anytime, any workout, any surface. My other shoe that I've recently just started running in a lot is the Nova Blast, which is a super cushy shoe. So that's going to be like an Adidas Ultra Boost. So that's like super soft, super just really comfy for easy days, recovery days. I feel like my legs, are super heavy after workout. So having that really good cushiony shoe it still has a good amount of response, but it's going to protect your legs and protect those quads and calves, all the things that get sore and tight after a really hard effort. And so I like to go to the Nova Blast for those really easy days of just jaunting around.
Nice. That's interesting that you're mentioning durability, right? And I think that is an interesting perception that people have around some of the newest carbon, the carbon plated racing flats. Is I'd love to know, like, what's your perception as far as like durability with these shoes? Like, what's the cue that says I need a fresh pair?
Yeah, this is another reason why I like the Nimbus so much. The gel Nimbus is super durable, and I can get around 800 miles out of a shoe, which is incredible to me. 800. I don't start feeling them break down until I get to around 800. Which is incredible to me. I don't think I've ever had a shoe that has lasted that long. They have the Nimbus Light also, which is more foam, so it's going to be a lot lighter, but it breaks down a little bit more. So I can feel myself breaking down with the Nimbus Light around maybe 300-400 miles, but still an incredible amount of mileage out of those ones also. But I think when I start to fatigue a lot sooner in runs, such as like my quads, I feel like are seizing up a little bit, or I start to have a little bit of weird foot pain. It's like stuff that's kind of like fluky. It just kind of comes out of nowhere. Then I start to think, I'm like, oh, I need to change out my shoes. I don't keep a log of it just because I really like to try to listen to my body. And whenever things start to feel a little weird or a little off, I think about my shoes. And yes, I have worn these for way too long. I need to switch these out. But another trick that I do to kind of keep the shoes going is I try to intermix them. So I'll do like 3 different Nimbuses at a time, and a couple different Nimbus Lights and a couple Nova Blasts and a couple Glide Rides. And so I'm always interchanging them, which I'm sure it can get a little confusing at times because people are like, well, how do you know like which one is breaking down and which one's not? But that's kind of my point too, is really trying to listen to your body and really trying to, just be one with what's going on through, the inner workings of your muscles and all that. And that's kind of how I get through that. And so once I feel that these shoes have had their time, then just switch them out. And yeah, that's my best advice anyway. Again, everybody's going to be different. It's not going to be 800 miles maybe for somebody else, but my form is also pretty efficient, so I think that tends to help when you're a strong runner that can get maybe a little bit more of the shoe.
I'm envisioning this like really, really intricate like storage process of like shoes and days of the week like rotating around some like crazy contraption, so which one goes next.
Yes, that I need that, definitely. That sounds great.
Hey, Emma, I'd love to follow up on, you mentioned like the recovery aspect of some of the newer racing flats, and that's a pathway that I kind of went down with Reed, your Minnesota friend, a few weeks ago when we were talking about the Adios Pro. Was essentially, we kind of got into not an argument, but a conversation about, hey, are these carbon plated shoes, what's the greater benefit? On one side, they are literally making you run faster in the moment. And then the other element is they are allowing you to recover faster. So what is the greater benefit? Is it that they're literally making you run faster in the moment, or is that it's allowing you to stack workouts on each other in a more efficient way because you're recovering better.
Oh, hands down, the compounding effect of being able to recover and being able to put all those workouts together. That is definitely, I mean, I am a proponent in completely like just slowing things down and enjoying the process and knowing that every single workout, every single day is going to create this amazing season in a couple of years. So you have to be patient. Like I wasn't running, 225 right off the bat. It was a lot of years of just trying to chip away, and I was able to stay healthy and stay recovered because of the Metaracer and because of the Nimbus, because of all these really good shoes that are helping in the recovery process. And so I can do a really hard effort in the Metaracers and come back the next day and feel like I can do another workout at the same level. And I don't think I've ever felt that way before in a flat prior to the Metaracer. And so that has been a game changer for me anyway, is the recovery. And I think people definitely don't hold recovery as too high of a standard as running fast. And so I definitely am on the side of the recovery.
I'm trying to think of like a comparison in sports where you have such a shift in a technology, right? And I'm thinking of golf, right? Imagine like I teed off every day with like a 3-iron, and all of a sudden someone handed me a driver, right? And you're just like, oh my God, I have this now to use forever. And you're like, how did we not use this before? And so it seems like, when I talk to people about these carbon plated shoes and the recovery aspects and the ability to run faster and all those things coupled together, I mean, how significant is this for a runner on a day-to-day basis now moving forward? And like life before that seems really weird.
Yeah. No, it seems super weird. And I mean, just talking to, prior Asics athlete, Dina Castor, she was talking about how, she ran in these shoes and she feels
never
like
had
she
that
can run 2
driver.
minutes faster. Yeah, no, she legitimately said she could have ran 2:17, and that's insane to me that these shoes can change so much. And again, like maybe it wasn't 2:17 right away, but 2:17 over the process of being able to recover, like we said, is huge. And I think this will definitely extend the career of a lot of runners and the longevity that we are able to withstand the miles because of these shoes now.
So I mean, Al, this is like a whole nother thing we're gonna have to dig into, is like Dina Castor and Joan Benoit. I mean, is there like a second wave of resurgence now?
Seriously?
Well, totally. And then we get into the conversation of like, you have the shoes and it makes you run faster, but then it also shifts your overall perceptions of what you can run, right? And so once it shifts your perception of what you can run, then like that has a cascading effect on your workouts, right? And then you're like, the workouts that you were doing before, you start like ratcheting down the splits a little bit and making things a little bit tighter. And again, it like levels up on like, okay, what could have Dina Castor actually run? You know what I mean? It's not just the technology, but it's like a psychological breakthrough, right? And we talk about things like sub 2, but like in the sub 4 mile, like psychological barriers are super legit. And I think that's a really fun conversation to have, that technology, when innovation breaks down like psychological barriers. And Emma, I'd wonder for you, like Ryan was saying, before and after, right? Carbon plated shoes, like, have you seen, like, when you look at workouts, and I think, and I know you work with your husband, like actually writing the physical workouts, like have splits changed? Have like perceptions of like structures of workout changed?
Oh, completely. And again, I'm very new at this distance, so I wasn't really sure what the possibility of, my potential could be. But once I started doing workouts, it was a huge step forward once I started wearing these shoes. It was something that we never thought that I would be able to do in workouts, let alone races. So at first I was like, okay, maybe like a 2:28 marathon, that would be great. maybe 227. But then when I started wearing the shoes, we're talking about, you know, running 222, maybe 221. And that's something that I never thought was going to be, you know, in my realm of capabilities. And so that has been hugely motivating. And so we're getting so excited. I mean, every single day it's just like ratcheting down the times. I mean, that's the progression of running in general, but just like, again, to make that huge jump in this point in my career has been immensely helpful in just, you know, trying to see my future and really being focused on the next step. So this has been very exciting for us.
You know, my last like sport comparison here, I was just thinking, you know, and at least sports within the sports that we cover at Flow Sports, of these technology and product innovations, I think to swimming, you know, back about 10 years ago, and you know, there were these suits that were essentially just destroying the world records, and swimming, it was a big controversy. You know, the start of this kind of shoe race you talked about felt a little bit like that to me, when there was, you know, there was not a level playing field in terms of shoe technology, and people were saying, hey, there's an advantage here. You know, you look at swimming, and swimming banned those suits, right? And said, hey, this is actually, we're not going to allow this, and we're not going to allow these records to be broken in these suits. Where running didn't take that approach. They said, hey, we're actually going to allow the door to be open for all companies to create this technology, and we see a benefit, and everyone's going to be able to have access to that benefit once their company creates it, right? So it seems very interesting the way two sports handled the technology shift. And as a runner, were you on, like, I mean, was there a point where you're on both sides of the fence when you didn't have it, where you're like, hey, this is unfair, and now that you have it, you're like, all right, we're good?
Yeah, there's definitely times where I questioned it, just because I love the purity of the sport, and I thought that was kind of, you know, wrestling with that. And the more that I'm in it, the more that I'm in the sport, and the more that I see that you know, the technology and just the thought that goes into it, I really think that we should welcome it in the sense of, you know, having guidelines. And that's why, you know, the World Athletics has all those guidelines. I mean, it makes sense to, you know, try to monitor it, but still allow it, because this is what makes, you know, the sport so great. We never thought that, you know, something like this could happen, where, you know, the equipment that we wear is going to be so, you know, changing, and that's going to be a game changer for, you know, world records and racing and all this stuff. And so I think it is really exciting for the fans, and I think it's even more exciting for the athletes, because we're able to do things that maybe, you know, didn't think that we could do. And maybe it is psychological, maybe the shoes aren't actually, you know, what's doing it, but the mindset of, you know, maybe it is. I don't know. It's so hard to, like, you know, I want to say that it's all me. I don't want to say that it's the shoes, but, you know, the shoes are amazing, and I can't. It's just so hard. Like, the purity of it is just always in my mind, and I don't want there to ever be a person that isn't able to run as fast because they can't afford a pair of shoes, which is, I guess, the opportunity that is life. And but just, I think that is something that we can really try to change, is, you know, the equipment changes. I think we need to change the opportunities as well. I'm sorry, I'm getting all, like, off topic.
Well, I think,
you're not wrong.
I think to put that in the perspective, though, because I've had this conversation too about the, you know, the shoe, and how, you know, like, again, there's like, you almost feel like there's this moral thought around how should I feel about this, right? But I mean, if you break it down simple, right, you running barefoot and you running with shoes is there's probably a difference there. There's probably an advantage. You having spikes or running on your bare feet is a very different situation, and that's okay. So, right, like,
Yeah.
And so again, my thought is just like, as the technology has advanced so much at different points in time, and specifically just in running, and I think it's been quite a while since we've had a really significant shift, and so that's why it feels so weird and almost uncomfortable, you know.
So yeah, no, this is why you have a podcast about this, and this is why we're talking about this, because, yeah, just asking questions, I think, is the where this is headed. This needs to be talked about. I think. Yeah, sorry. You go ahead. I'll leave you guys. I just start babbling.
No,
I
man.
don't even.
I think it's no, Emma. It's totally valid, right? It's like we start getting into this topic, and it's like, where do you draw the line of advantage versus disadvantage, right? It's such a gray area, right? And it's like, once you start really diving into the tributaries that are pouring into elite running, and you start seeing all the hurdles that some people have to go through, it's like, okay, the people that are on this track have all the advantages already, but are we really doing our sport a service by opening up everything else, right? Well, like, as far as, racial inequalities and access to the sport, like, we figured out the product part of it, but I don't know if we've figured out the access part to it, right? And one thing has grown exponentially in comparison to the other, and it's like, okay, this is great. Maybe we've put all of our bandwidth and we've hit a wall as far as the technology kind of aperture, but now it's time to take all of our creative bandwidth and let's start pouring it into access and see what that would actually do for the sport. Because now that we have the technology figured out, what if we actually had the talent pool that some of the other sports had? And I think that could even open up apertures and could create new records that we didn't even consider in the first place. I think it's a total valid discussion, and I think it's totally like a valid kind of pathway when you start talking about shoe technologies and innovations and advantages.
Exactly. That's exactly what I wanted to say. So thank you for putting it into words.
It's totally justified.
Alex is here.
Well, Emma, I think one of the coolest things about the last few years, and you talked about, is it just, kind of athlete based, or is it technology based? What has kind of like propelled the career forward? I think it's really cool that you took this completely different path in your athletic career, and there's also paralleled next to it a renaissance in kind of your career, and layered on top of that is this great new technology that's also kind of enabled you. So I think, we as fans of the sport have really enjoyed kind of your journey back to Boise. I remember visiting you in Boise before you moved out to Boston, and I remember thinking, gosh, she's really going to leave this place. So it's interesting to see you back and thriving. But I think what we love to do next is give some credence to the brand and how we got to this crazy kind of advancement in technology. So we really appreciate your insights today. We wish you the best as you chop wood and carry water, as they say. And now we're gonna toss it over to a little more of the brand perspective with our man, a product line manager at Asics, and Chad Mullavey. And he's going to give us some insights on how we got to where we are today in innovation.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Thanks, Emma.
For joining, Emma. Chad, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining us all the way from Boston. How you doing?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Doing well.
Very good. Very good. Well, just had a great chat with Emma and got her take on the Metacracer and kind of her perspective of how that came to be and what she's experienced with it. So it's super insightful. I know you have a background in running, not only working at Asics, but being a runner yourself. So I want to just, rewind a few years, about 3 years. This guy, Eliud Kipchoge, trying to break 2 hours in the marathon, doesn't do it the first time, then comes back and does it. There's you as a runner, there's you as a PLM for Asics. What are you thinking when you're watching this?
Yeah, I think like most people, there's a lot of talk of, can humans even break that speed limit or like that barrier? I think that's why it got such big press and PR was it was just a really big attempt. As a runner, I think I was just intrigued to see, how are they going to pull this off? I think there was a lot of kind of controlling of the conditions with regard to like the Tesla, the pack that he was drafting off of, the product that was not out yet. And as somebody working for another brand, I think it was just exciting to kind of see the shift in terms of how quickly things had innovated in such a short time.
I think for like a lot of, general fans out there, right? They're focused on the performance, right? The sub 2, and is it going to happen? But for you, as not only a fan, but then as on the product side for Asics, at what point do you shift your thought and you're like, oh man, like there's something here that we're going to have to be ready to respond to?
Yeah, I think that's inherent kind of with the territory, where when you're in product, you're working on like an 18-month calendar. So with regard to how quickly you can kind of respond, it's a bit of a delay. And so in that regard, it's like seeing this happen and kind of seeing history kind of be rewritten in terms of what people thought was humanly impossible kind of being possible. And then all of the discussions of mechanical doping and, all these things with regards to World Athletics and IAAF, and really kind of re-outlining or reconfiguring what we could do from a product standpoint. For me, it's just exciting. I mean, it really kind of rewrites. I think this is going to be a very unique inflection point with regard to how product is built in the future.
Hey, Chad, I think it's interesting. You use the term responding to it, right? But is it fair to make the assumption that, when we started talking about Eliud and a carbon plated shoe, and like that isn't necessarily new technology, right? Like when you started hearing about the technology, was there almost an instance of like, well, yeah, that's going to make him run faster. Yes, we already know about carbon plated shoes. Like how early on was that because that was just the visual race, right? But carbon plated things had to be discussed way before that. Like when did that conversation start actually happening in the footwear innovation world?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think most brands do their due diligence to kind of watch the patents and kind of see what's going on. And then also meeting with other various vendors or kind of vendor partners to kind of determine how can we potentially reapply existing technologies. I think knit is a really great example of that, where your grandma's crocheting or knitting is basically the foundation or groundwork for what became a knitted upper now on a running shoe, where it's done with a different scale with more performance oriented materials. But a lot of things are not necessarily new innovations. It's new applications of existing materials in a way that improves the performance benefit for the end consumer.
Can you maybe just explain what you mean by watch the patents? Because it seems like it's probably something that's normal for you, but for someone outside of the industry and following footwear technology, like what does that mean, and why are you following patents?
Sure. I think like anytime like a larger company that's openly traded, such as like an Apple or a Nike or whomever you might be referring to, they have to file patents to kind of correlate to new applications of whether it be like a utility or a new construction, for instance. So basically, it allows them to block other brands from potentially infringing upon intellectual property. So if there's a new innovation, chances are there's going to be a patent in place to kind of give that the freeway or the lane, if you will, to allow them to have a unique point of view.
Got it.
Hey, Chad, I'd love to know, when you look at when you find your own kind of version, right, of this technology, the Asics voice in this innovation kind of landscape, what was the biggest challenge from concept to on-shelf delivery that was facing this shoe being the Metacracer?
Yeah, so the Metacracer kind of started with Tokyo in mind in terms of like the launch date. And so I would say like the biggest challenges we worked towards that was, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the things were being kind of worked out as we talked. So in terms of World Athletics, IAAF, so stack height wasn't really determined yet in terms of that 40 millimeter stack height or lower for a men's size 9. The plate configuration wasn't fully even a discussion yet. And so a lot of those things kind of became, to a certain extent, kind of new barriers, if you will, in terms of how we had to design or develop around that. And so when looking at the Olympics, we were actually a gold sponsor for that, and it's in our home country. And Asics is kind of, known for being kind of a performance heritage brand from Japan. And so for us, it was really a moment to kind of re-engage with the global audience with regard to what our brand stood for. And then because of, it being in Japan and there being it being in the summer months, there's quite a bit of heat and humidity. And so also considering kind of things like the upper material, And the rest of the holistic design that kind of came into consideration when we were briefing and then building this product.
In terms of the, this timeline on when this stuff happened, and I'm interested in what was kind of the impetus around the conversation and the technology for you guys. Was it a competitor? Was it, seeing a patent come out that you said, oh man, there might be something here that someone's trying to get a jump on us? Was it performances that started coming? Like, what really was that driving force to say, and maybe the conversation had happened a little bit, but really the driving force to say, all right, now we really got to put this in motion?
Yeah, I would say a lot of it was kind of started with our Meta Ride. The Meta Ride was basically kind of the first shoe for us it was a training product, and it was sitting atop kind of our efficiency silo. And so it was utilizing this new guide sole construction, which the guide sole is basically a reinforced, slightly stiffer forefoot with a slight rocker to it. And the idea there is that it basically improves efficiency through the kinetic chain for the runner. And so the consideration there was, how do we apply this technology, which is designed to really allow the runner to run longer, to allow them to run faster and break records. And so that was really kind of the genesis or the impetus behind this product. And so I would say, like, for a lot of brands, you don't really know what other brands are doing in terms of you're kind of working in parallel. And so really for us, it's, what's our unique point of view and how are we coming to market with this? And so with developing and designing the Metaracer, it was really taking this learning in terms of energy efficiency and improvement, and then tuning it for racing and working with our elite athletes to kind of figure out the correct recipe or menu, if you will, to deliver that in a meaningful way.
Hey, Chad, I'd love to, you touched on this a little bit, but you mentioned, kind of the heritage element with Tokyo hosting the Olympics and Asics being so intertwined with that culture and that heritage. I gotta assume that the interest in this shoe was high across, kind of cross category, right? Did it feel like there was any additional pressure to deliver a shoe of this caliber in time for an Olympics that is in the host city of your HQ?
Yeah, I would say there's definitely some pressure. Personally, I don't think that there was much pressure on the product team to deliver on time. It was more having it ready for the commercial launch to hit that 4-month kind of availability to then allow our athletes to run in it. So when that kind of got instated, it put a little bit more pressure on kind of our supply chain to make sure that we were ready to have the product commercially available, so that we could then allow our athletes to run in it and have it be essentially sanctioned.
Yeah. Did that timeline change? Like, what was the original timeline, and how did you have to adjust? By how much did you have to adjust to be able to have that accessible for the elite athletes?
I mean, I don't want to go into it too much, but I would say, like, we kind of discussed all the different kind of contingencies in terms of, like, do we have to air freight the product? Do we have to, like, we had, as we started the project, there was, as you can imagine, quite a few different prototypes working with some of our elite athletes. Some of them would go to Japan, they'd get their foot custom measured. We'd have, custom lasts for them. There was a lot of tailoring in terms of stack height, material density, plate thickness, plate material even. So it really wasn't started per se through the lens of like a commercial product. It was really, once we distilled down a lot of the commonalities we saw through our athlete feedback, that we then essentially came with one point of view for Metaracer.
Got it.
Hey, Chad, you touched a little bit on, playing with different lasts and stack heights. I think obviously when anybody looks at the Asics Metaracer, I think the first thing that they're going to obviously notice is that it is a relatively low profile silhouette, and the stack height of the Metaracer is much lower, and it still it essentially looks like more of a traditional maybe racing flat. I think we'd love to know what can you share how that approach might differentiate the model? Like, why did you go that route, and how does that differentiate the actual feeling of putting on the shoe compared to some of the other taller stack height plated shoes?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Looking at a pair right next to me now, so sorry if I was looking off screen there. Um, yeah,
Nice.
so really, it came through the lens of just our athlete feedback. So obviously, anytime you're working with an athlete, they're kind of the top of the top in regards to like they're chasing that 1 or 2% improvement to really land them a record. And so, in that regard, as we looked at things such as material durability, overall athlete feedback in terms of allowing them to get the experience they wanted. That's kind of how we landed on that 25-14, or excuse me, 24-15 stack height here for this shoe. So we were well aware of kind of what our competition was doing with regard to really this high stack height, and in lab testing and in some of the consumer feedback, looking at some of the durability metrics and other things, and just how soft that midsole was and some of the implications of that potentially for athlete injury. We kind of took that into consideration as kind of a feedback loop, and then we obviously had our own point of view in terms of this product.
Yeah, it's interesting, Chad. I mean, you kind of alluded to this earlier. You said it's kind of about the application of some of the technologies that we have. Can you, I guess, kind of dive into a little bit more? It almost feels like sometimes the footwear race isn't necessarily that we are creating just different pieces of innovation inside the shoe, but we are applying them in different combinations. Is that fair to say? And I guess how does Asics approach kind of mixing and matching those kind of different algorithms of uppers versus midsole, and like what is that design process like for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, to answer the first part of it, like, yes, many of these innovations or technologies have been available in aerospace or in other applications for a while. It's just really how do we apply them to effectively get to the end goal. So anytime you build a product, you're working with things such as cost parameters that can affect profitability. I mean, we're a for-profit company like everybody else is, and so you can't just come out with a shoe that's $1,000 or things of that nature, because then nobody's going to buy it. So I would say in terms of when we designed it, it was taking into consideration with the upper and with some of the elements on the upper here. The heat was a key metric in terms of in the lab. We saw that basically as the runner gets too hot, they really have the chance to fatigue quickly. And so the kind of this 4-foot port, which I know a lot of people on Instagram or other platforms have kind of made a meme about in terms of the USB port. This is actually kind of an intake port to allow air to kind of come into the shoe. And then the way that the upper is designed is that then kind of the hot air can exit through different areas on the upper as well. So a lot of those different elements were taken into consideration in terms of, again, through the lens of Tokyo and then beyond. It's not to say that this product is only for the Olympics, but considering product weight, upper fit in terms of application, durability. So obviously we want to make a product that's going to last at least a marathon. For this particular product, we had a durability target that was quite a bit higher than that. Looking at things like traction as that relates to efficiency, and then looking at other things as well in terms of like the plate construction. Obviously there's P-backs, there's nylon, there's glass fiber, there's a lot of different materials in terms of that material library. And it's really kind of tuning it to make sure that you're getting the correct end result. So if you had like a nylon or a TPU plate, for instance, you might not get the same rigidity in the forefoot. And so therefore you'd have a little bit less efficiency as you toe off in terms of kind of that mechanical, your foot acting as that kind of more rigid lever at toe off. And so all these things were really considered in terms of, how do we create this perfect recipe for our athletes?
That's really interesting. I think that little notch in the front, it's an interesting insight and an interesting departure kind of from the typical designs we've seen. It actually reminds me of a pair of, I think of Roka sunglasses have a little notch right in the middle of the kind of that nose guard, and it's designed for a little bit of airflow. And you mentioned it, like it's built for the elite athlete who's seeking that 1 or 2%, advantage. And like, so in that sense, everything matters, every consideration matters. And I think it's interesting that, we have these kind of departures, like the carbon plates, like that little notch you have in the front of the shoe, but it's still, when I look at the silhouette, if I saw it on a wall, I would say, yeah, that's definitely an Asics racing flat. It doesn't feel like a giant departure from your overall brand identity. So I'd love to know, like, when, although this is a drastic direction and kind of new model, what were the things that were like, no, that like in the Asics design brand book ethos, this has to be relevant? And like, where does that come to life in the Metaracer?
Okay. I don't know if I fully understand the question, so I'll try to answer it to the best of my ability, and then maybe you can you can inform me where I missed the boat. So I would say, like, in terms of mainly maybe a perception of it being a little bit more Asics in terms of the stack height and how, you know, Saucony among other companies have kind of gone to the very high stack height. Again, that was really kind of coming off of our athlete feedback. So we're building this for them to make them comfortable. And I think, as Emma said earlier, even the psychology behind it in terms of if they feel more comfortable, they're going to likely put down a better time. And so, you know, I'm basically a steward of building a product to better suit that consumer. And so while I might not be that elite athlete, we're very conscious of the feedback they give and then try to influence that in the product. That being said, there really wasn't a you can't do this or yes, you can do this with regard to brand guidelines for this product. And I would say, like, this is kind of the first foray into this space in terms of kind of like as some people have mentioned, like the carbon super shoes or like the racing super product. And so innovation obviously doesn't happen it's not in standstill. There's kind of continuous movement or progress there. And so as this is in market now, there's quite a few other things that we're working on that we're excited to share with you guys in the near future.
By the end of the show, you mean, right?
Yeah, it's actually under the table here.
I wanted to, switch gears a little bit, Chad, and ask you about your perspective of kind of working with the athletes through this process. We talked to Emma. She described, what she called the shoe race and, the patience that as an athlete you have to have while you see things coming out from whether it's other brands or other athlete performances, and talked about how she was in the world record race, with the marathon and all these things. So how did that play out from your perspective in terms of just kind of managing that patience with the athletes while you guys are working through the process, and they're at some point, have now an expectation, our brand's coming out with something, we're ready for it. Other folks are starting to get on the, the roads and the tracks with their product. So what was that like from your perspective in managing that, those expectations and that patience that the athletes needed to have while you guys work through it?
Yeah, I think the athletes give us a good level of like tension or pushback with regard to, it's a good barometer in terms of like, if the product is really great, they're like, I want to race in it now. And then if it still needs further improvement, then they'll give us pretty clear guidelines in terms of what they need to be improved. A lot of the communication is managed through our sports marketing team and then through development as well. So it's kind of a collaborative group. It's not just myself meeting with our athletes, but we listen and we respect, every athlete. That being said, like, we work with athletes in Europe and Asia, North America. And so that's, on the one hand, we're trying to, get to a common ground of consensus in terms of how do we deliver the best solution for the broadest array of our athletes. And that being said, like I mentioned earlier, there are other product solutions in the pipeline that will likely be available before actual Tokyo for 2021. So we're just pretty excited in terms of, this initial foray into this space. And I think, anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Nice.
So for, using the athletes' feedback as that barometer, right? I mean, that's I think an interesting way for you guys to feel the pressure is like, if they really like it, they want it, right? Like, which is a good thing. Where for the Metaracer in the feedback that you guys got, how did their feedback guide that barometer, and how did it compare to, maybe some past product, in terms of their eagerness to get it and their response to, testing it out?
Yeah. So, I mean, every athlete really, most of all of our athletes are kind of involved in wear testing of future prototypes. And so in this regard, they'd been racing in the shoe for, nearly a year before it was out in public. You guys probably saw it on Sarah Hall among other athletes. It was kind of all blacked out. In terms of the feedback, there was, you're not going to satisfy everybody. That's just kind of the reality of it all. I think some of them wanted potentially a little bit, higher stack height. Some of them wanted a little bit firmer, a little bit lower stack height. So it's, I think we came to kind of a good neutral ground in terms of delivering, a shoe that's going to be protective, durable, and that's going to allow them to, finish with less effort with regards to kind of the efficiency application here. And as we're seeing from like McKenna and some of our other athletes, actually PR in the product as well. So in that regard, I think there's some tangible results that we're seeing that are attributed to the product. But it is kind of an interesting kind of towing of the line in that you're never going to, please everybody.
I mean, it's interesting too, because it's not you guys as a brand, whether it's making decisions internally or looking at what competitors are doing, you're not just saying, hey, we think this is where it needs to be and we're going to do it. You're literally taking the feedback from the current athletes you have to help guide where you need to be. And then, like you're saying, find the middle ground where it essentially meets the needs of the most amount of people you can get. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I think the psychology of the athletes has kind of changed a little bit just because of how quickly, or I would say like it's been a magnitude shift in terms of innovation and kind of what this space represents. And so even if you're a sponsored athlete, a lot of the athletes are kind of pretty aware of what's available from a footwear standpoint across the gamut. And so they might have tried on a competitor's product or maybe they were formerly with a competitor. And so in that regard, it's not in isolation. And so in terms of their feedback, they're often pretty vocal in terms of like, hey, I need the equipment or the tools to allow me to succeed. And so we're not in the business of preventing them to be successful athletes or not, feel confident in the product. And so it does kind of elevate the table stakes, if you will, in terms of, it puts a lot of impetus on us to come with really a solution that's not just a fluff piece.
So from your side, there's the elite athletes. There's also like I've been involved in product testing for brands in the past as a non-elite athlete, right? And there's clubs that work with brands. As someone on the product side, what is the kind of feedback that is most helpful for you guys to receive from people testing your products?
Yeah, I think from the athletes, some of our athletes, like Sarah Hall, for instance, when we talk with her, she has her coach and her biomechanist who will actually record her in various prototypes. And through that, we can look at things like just overall how she's setting up in the shoe, how efficient she is in terms of, getting through gait, things of that nature. And so it makes it a little bit more objective, I guess would be one way of putting it, where you're kind of, a lot of athletes, I think they're very in tune with their body and with their equipment. And so for better or for worse, that allows them to kind of be very nitpicky on certain things. And so when we can kind of dial that back a little bit and see some of the metrics in the lab in terms of VO2, on foot in terms of how the product's performing, that actually is probably one of the biggest insights. And so obviously we test our product with our athletes. We also have third-party testing with two different outfits, one that's a lab in the US, and the other one that's basically kind of a wear test platform that is comprised of a number, I want to say 10,000 plus people. And so really we can kind of target depending on, the demographic of the product for race pace, target weight, things of that nature to make sure that we're getting the relevant consumer in that product to give us a comprehensive look at in terms of feedback.
So a quick summary: data, folks, is what
Yeah.
Opinions are great, and I say that jokingly, but it's like, I think some folks lead with opinions and kind of a subjective anecdote around, but data is it's what drives all companies, and obviously for you guys, it's like when you can get your hands on real data that helps you analyze the performance of a product, that is ultimately the best guide you can get. Yeah.
I mean, I would say like I'm an engineer by education. And so like data I'm a big fan of it. Data doesn't lie. You can have a lot of different opinions, but if you put a consumer in a product and they're performing better in it and it shows empirically, then it's a pretty good tell.
Yeah.
Hey, Chad, I want to open the aperture a little bit about what are the insights that you intake to make products? As an engineer, we talked about the carbon plated footwear kind of arms race and what that did to innovation. But what are some of the other outside inspirations that you as an engineer take from? What are products or industries that you continue to earn like inspiration or kind of insights from that you think have kind of like molded your perception on design?
Yeah, boy. I think probably the most analogous one to racing would be like Formula One, where they have a lot of
Cool.
set kind of ground lines or parameters, and with regard to engine size, vehicle weight, all these things that kind of help to level the playing field. And I think we're kind of starting to see that just with regard to stack height and some of those other metrics that really on the one hand kind of democratize performance. So you're trying to allow as many athletes the fairest chance as possible to kind of pursue their goals in a purest sense. And so having those rules, I think on the one hand allows every brand to kind of innovate within reason. So we're not trying to build something that is going to disqualify anybody, at least from an actual record attempt. But so that's an industry that I like to follow in terms of automotive and Formula One for racing at least. I would say like consumer electronics is always super fascinating in terms of how fast that space moves. And then I'm also a pretty avid cyclist. So in that regard, just kind of seeing the application of technology and how it's, repurposed or remastered, if you will, to fit kind of some of the consumer insight needs. I think one of the interesting ones is as this pandemic has started to kind of continue to rage, gravel biking and mountain biking in general has gotten a lot more prolific. And we're seeing even in that space, suspension kind of even go on to like a gravel bike, because obviously if you have suspension that allows you to ride longer with less fatigue. And so just kind of seeing how you can kind of think a little bit differently to solve the same problem. I think a lot of times we looked at shoes and it's like, okay, upper, midsole, outsole, insert EVA, insert PU, insert like a nylon based foam. And you've got, some combination of those three. And now there's new foaming methods. There's, knit. There's just a broad swath. And I don't think that's going to slow down anytime soon.
It's interesting you say that, because I feel like every cyclist I know, like the kind of like the gradual graduation is like, I bought a road bike, I bought an indoor trainer, and now I'm on Zwift. And then now everyone is getting a gravel bike. Everything I see is gravel bike on anyone who I know who bikes. But it's interesting too, because it kind of goes back to one of my original questions about like carbon plated things. Like is the bike space like ahead of us here? Because I've been hearing the term carbon fiber for like at least the last decade in bike technology. Like, do we feel like there are elements of the cycling world being a step or two ahead of the footwear world? Is that fair?
Maybe like from a competitive sense. I mean, again, just one man's opinion here, but I think you look at kind of road cycling shoes and how they have different plates in terms of the power transfer. Some are nylon, some are carbon. I think BOA kind of made its first entrance in cycling. There's a lot of different innovations that occur in aerospace, automotive, and cycling. In terms of carbon fiber, that was first used really for the higher specific strength in terms of strength to weight ratio. Obviously, cost was a limiting factor for footwear, and the fact that you're running through your product a little bit quicker than a bike, which you might have for a season or two. But yeah, I think there is kind of a lot of maybe crossover, cross-pollination that can occur in those three adjacent industries.
So second podcast, we've really drawn some comparisons to cycling, and really what keeps coming out, Al, is that cycling is just ahead of running. So we need to get on. Maybe we need to get on a bike to catch up, and then we can get running again.
I need a motorized one to get.
Yeah, get me on the e-bike, and then we'll get back on the shoes. I'm interested in your take, Chad, on just kind of the excitement around the launch of the Metaracer and this new product for the athletes. Like, what's been the most exciting moment for you since the launch? Whether that's just kind of a marker that you guys had, whether it was a performance from an athlete, what has gotten you most excited since launch?
Yeah, boy, I'm trying to kind of pull back, working ahead, and then trying to like move back into the current time that we're in right now. I think like Emma alluded to, hearing some of the feedback from our older, elite athletes like Dina Castor, and how she basically said, had I had this product when I was in my peak, I could have run, I think it was 2:17, she said. And so I think there is some merit to to product providing potentially a bit of a competitive advantage, and again within reason. I think the launch was pretty unique in regards to like the VR aspect of it. That was because of some of the extenuating circumstances. We hosted kind of the product launch in that digital way, which I hadn't seen a footwear company do before. It's been done in electronics, but I thought that was pretty innovative. But no, I think just we're still kind of hearing some of the groundswells in terms of like from the actual maybe, weekend warrior or consumers looking to kind of have that competitive edge. And that's really kind of, I think, what makes me most excited is, racing and seeing potentially the consumer you wouldn't build the product for adopting your product because they want to get, the 1 to 2 minute PR that they've been kind of training for 6 months. And so they see a product and they're like, that's going to allow me to do that. That's a pretty awesome feeling, knowing that you're kind of elevating somebody's potential of what they think is possible for their own training. I mean, not everybody can run a 2-hour marathon, but we all can improve incrementally. And so I think accessibility in terms of this product is a really important thing for the future of the sport, whether that be more accessible price points that has a similar technology, or how does this influence, a broader assortment of how we build products. I think that's one of the best things about running is just that you just need some shoes and something to run on. So.
Yeah. And I mean, Emma brought it up just as you did on the accessibility piece. How do you approach that new technology in the initial launch, and that price point is normally a little higher, right? To get it out there. And then think about, all right, now that we have a technology that is working and people do like, where do you go to make it more accessible? How do you accomplish that?
Yeah, so I think anytime you try to scale a technology, you have to kind of consider what the consumer demand is going to be. So obviously working within the confines of cost, if you just from an economic standpoint, if you have a product that's $200, your consumer pool might be this big. And then if you have a product that's $100, it's going to be this big. And so everything is kind of factored through kind of supply chain in that regard. So if you buy more of something, it's going to cost less to produce it from like a factory standpoint. And so I don't think it's too leading to say that we'll have some solutions that take kind of inspiration from this and bring it to a more democratized, broader audience in the near future.
Yeah, it's interesting because and especially with this kind of product, because there is such a buzz about the benefits, more so than I think we've seen in recent years. So.
And Chad, I think it's interesting. You keep mentioning, like it's like the innovation window is completely open, but we're bound by the rules of cost, right? But is it fair to say that there is a much faster shoe that could be created if price points weren't a concern?
I think probably every brand is prototyping that right now.
Yeah.
So it's a great question. I think we're all trying to figure out what's the limit with regard to both inside the current boundaries of 40 millimeter stack heights and single plates, but also, for the athlete who maybe isn't looking to win prize money or break a record, that just wants to have a more, exciting run. What's the solution there? And so I don't want to speak for other brands, but I know that we're experimenting in kind of, like you said, like right now there's kind of a lane for racing, and we kind of took that, and I'd say it's a pretty broad open field right now. And so we're experimenting with new materials and new constructions. And so I don't think the innovation train, like I said, is going to slow down anytime soon. I mean, you've seen that with, even a recent product that we launched, like the Nova Blast. Like there's a lot of different things in the hopper that aside from racing that we're working on.
Yeah, and I won't make you dive into this anymore, just for brand's sake. But I think it's we have to consider that at some point you have to create this model that is up here and out of reach and perceived as rule breaking. Like at some point you have to make the thing that gets you faster, but it might break the rules, and slowly tune it down into the rules. So like, I mean, like you said, like I'm sure there's all the brands out there are exploring like, okay, this is what a shoe could be. We have to land, like first we're going to land this technology, and then we have to start chipping away and working it into a margin that the supply chain won't laugh at.
Sure. Yep.
And also creating technologies that, allow World Athletics to create new regulation, right? Things they haven't seen before. And I mean, that was actually one of my questions. You answered a little bit there, but I'm curious as you as a product person, and this is probably a tough question because I know you guys work 18 months out, right? So the next technology is probably already being talked about, but like, what is, any prediction that you have on that next technological advancement? And maybe even if you can't answer that in the near term, because you're already working on it, past what you think people are even working on.
Yeah. I mean, I think had you asked me this question maybe a few months ago when everything was quote, quote, normal, it might have been a different answer. Right now, in terms of what I see is maybe like a trend, and what I think has a meaningful impact for the broadest assortment of individuals in terms of runners and people who maybe aren't racing, but just enjoy the sport, would be the application of additive engineering, whether that be additive engineering with regards to personalizing, upper fit, or, tuning the midsole to give you a more unique ride. And obviously, every product right now is at least from the major manufacturers, is mass produced, and so with that, we're building to kind of the standard in terms of like an average consumer, or really who we envision, if you will, be running in the product. And so to I think kind of move the needle to the next level, it would be, how do we take inputs from the consumer, similar to what we do with elite athletes in terms of designing a custom last, or tuning the midsole material, or tuning other elements based on their biomechanics or gait. And I think there's solutions with regards to like footbeds and things like that, but I think you're going to see an acceleration of many more components that allow you to do that in a way that's economical and scalable.
So just more.
That's it. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so more customization in a economical way. Is that kind of what you're saying?
I would say that, and then the other component to that, whether it be in shoe or other kind of accessories, would just be more data metrics in terms of individuals being able to kind of better understand their body when they're running at race pace versus training, to really optimize and kind of better tailor their training program to achieve their fitness level. I think right now there's diet and all these other things that are I don't want to say they're hard, but it's just like the average person, maybe it's kind of a foreign language. And so as we're seeing with wearables and all these other things, it's kind of taking a lot of that guessing out of it and turning it more into a science.
More data for the engineer to create better product, right?
Yes,
please.
More insights. Well, we appreciate your insight today, Chad. I think, we, to pull the curtain back a little bit and understand, what's been kind of pushing performance forward here and this innovation. And I think we also appreciate getting to know the people who are, on the ground, making those things happen. And to get your insight was, I think, really fun today. And we appreciate your time, and we want to congratulate you and the Asics team for pushing this thing out, and wish you guys the best of luck as Tokyo 2021 hopefully comes down the pipe next year.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, guys. It's been a pleasure.
So another pretty in-depth look at some of the shoe technology that has been kind of sweeping the industry over the last few months and last year. I love getting the perspective of the athlete and the folks behind the product, right? Because it kind of gives you two views of what's going on. And for the athlete, they're not really behind the curtain. They're part of the process, but they're not behind the curtain like the guys on the product side or the folks on the design and innovation side. So it's just, I love that. And, talking with Emma, it made me smile in the beginning because she called it the shoe race. And like you and I are talking about that, and folks in media talk about it, but that's what it is, right? And the athletes see it, and it was it was a very, very significant moment where brands were trying to get product out and kind of catch up to where competition was, and really ultimately put their, when we're coming from the elite athlete side, put their elite athletes in a place to be on a quote unquote level playing field.
Right. And one of my favorite, like, it's a weird dichotomy that we were chatting with Emma, and we've kicked off the conversation about her living out in the woods, right, with no running water. She's at Albertsons to pick up her water for the day, but we're also talking about like the most advanced shoe technologies in the world. So like, what a sport, and like what an interesting like kind of personality that Emma represents there, that you're at the two opposite ends of the spectrum, which is a great, quick screenshot of what running really is, right? The simplest form of human movement, but with the most advanced technologies.
Yeah. And I thought she, at the end, when we talked about, kind of the product being at this point now that it, really a shift in the more recent years where there's this advancement in performance because of the technology, and that kind of moral dilemma of how to think about it. And, it ultimately leads Emma to think about accessibility, right? And how do we have a product that now does advance performance, but make sure that all runners can get it, right? And it just was really interesting because you and I have talked on this show about running being such an accessible sport. I think back to our conversation with Frank Ross, and even thinking like, hey, well, actually, running shoes can be expensive and can be hard for folks to buy. And now you're talking about a $200+ shoe, and does that separation, that gap become even greater for folks that are young in trying to be on a level playing field of technology and have that performance that allows them to compete with a competitor or whatever it might be, or work out on a team,
Totally. And like, okay, so the follow-up on there is like, hey, we talked about the perceptions, right? So we have this small community of the world that now has this technology and is now like breaking the perceptions of what's possible, right? So now they have this whole mental kind of advantage that the other people haven't done. Like, they don't even think that they can do, 20 times 465 flat, whatever the marker is. Like, there's a small quadrant of people, of privileged people now, who have the advantage, like the technological advantage and a psychological breakthrough advantage that only just kind of like keeps amplifying each other, right? So the accessibility question is totally valid, and I think we're definitely going to have to like address it when it comes to high school sports, even collegiate sports, man. I mean, like, when we start looking at like even like, a Mount Sac, right? Or a lot of the California high school races that are cross country-ish, but aren't really on trails, so kids might be able to wear racing flats. Like, what is that going to look like? There's going to be a complete disadvantage to the kids who have access to some and those who don't. So I applaud her for bringing that up, because it's important for us to not lose sight of that conversation in our sports ecosystem. The one last thing I wanted to shout out about Emma, which I thought was cool, is she said that along the lines of, finally technology caught up with the human body. And I thought that was such an interesting perspective, right? It's like totally flipped, right? So traditionally we think of like, here's this technology, we're going to slap it on this body of this human being, and now the being is faster. Or the opposite perspective is, look at this human body and look how fast it can make a shoe run. It's just an interesting kind of flip of perspective, and I appreciated that. And it just lays into the idea that the human body is the most efficient machine, not foam and glue and uppers.
Right. And, just going back to the accessibility one more time, as you said, really appreciate that. That's kind of how where Emma's mind goes when this is happening. And it kind of weaves into Chad, who we then spoke with, right? Because he was also on that same page. Is that right? Now we have to think about accessibility, right? And so it was interesting that two very completely kind of different ends of how they're intersecting with this technology, but both have that thought in mind. And I did appreciate that. The other thing I actually appreciated from Chad was just in the beginning talking about his perspective as a fan of running and being a runner himself, seeing these breakthroughs happen and how he essentially interpreted that as a fan and as a guy who's trying to create a product to compete in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally interesting. And I think it's fun. I'm glad that he was still like able to like embrace it, and enjoy it as a fan. I think like there were some brands out there that saw the sub 2 like attempt and they like belittled it just because they couldn't, see past brand, parameters, and like which is a bummer because first I hope you can still be a fan of running, right?
Right.
What I thought was interesting about Chad's perspective from like an engineering kind of train of thought is like there are technologies that exist right now that might push us forward, but they just haven't been applied in the right way, right? So there's things out there and maybe we just haven't gotten the mixture correct, right? And I'm sure that's like, it probably ebbs and flows, right? There's new technologies and then there's the application of them. And then there's new technology and there's their applications of them. And I just thought that was an interesting insight to, maybe we're past carbon plated things now. And now we just have to work on how they interact with the rest of the shoe, whether that be uppers, whether that be the glues, the eyelids, the whatever's like, how do we start playing with those sort of formulas?
And I think if I was to answer that from Chad's lens, he'd probably bring up data.
Exactly.
And, I thought it was, again, coming from an engineering background and, and really, if you're looking at any company, right, decisions should be, and if they're not, there's probably a bigger issue, like should be based on data, right? Not opinion or anecdote or whatever it might be. And I think, he reminded us of that when we asked him, hey, when you're getting feedback from runners, like what's most helpful? Ultimately it's data, right? And, I had mentioned like I've been a part of wear testing before because someone at a company and they can get you on the wear testing list or whatever it might be. And, you fill out your form. Hopefully you do. Sometimes you don't. You just wear the shoe, right? But like you fill out your form, give your opinion on what you felt. Maybe your only piece of data is really like how many miles did you run in and maybe like what pace did you run at?
Yeah.
But
step in comfort, rate from 1 to 5.
Right. And so, but now, like you might not have your own biomechanist like Sarah Hall does, who's like filming you on a treadmill and outputting data. But everyone now has access to wearables, right? And you actually do have access to your data, GPS, your Garmin, your Strava, whatever it might be, right? And so, I kind of just I like that and would throw that note out there to folks that are in wear testing, whether you're elite athlete, sub elite, or casual runner that knows someone at a shoe company. Give them some data. They love to hear your opinions. I mean, that's obviously kind of your first experience and your first reaction, but like, if you can back it with data and provide that, the more data we have, the quicker we help drive innovation, right? So that was right. Just kind of an interesting thought he threw out there.
And I think it's like especially relevant, that conversation now, given the wearable device landscape, right? It's like there's so many new devices, so many new technologies that are giving us all these pieces of data, right? So like which one is going to actually give us like digestible, concise data that people like Chad can actually ingest and do something with, right? So we can talk about Oura rings, we can talk about the Garmin pods, the Stride, whatever is the Whoop bands, cool, awesome. But like, what is the digestible, concise piece of information that we should be pulling from these wearable devices and sharing? Or maybe they won't. Maybe they hold it back and it's now this like super valuable piece of information that some of these wearable device companies, they want to protect from the brands, right? And now that kind of creates an interesting kind of partnership between footwear and wearable brands. Somebody has the data, but somebody has the community. So it's an interesting conversation, and those partnerships all are discussed, I'm sure, at some of the events and in some lobbies of hotels. And the technology race is definitely on from a footwear perspective, but also a wearable device perspective. And I think that's going to propel our sport forward overall. So what that next hardware or what the next technology will be is something we're going to keep diving into and poke around in, and something that's discussed beneath the grandstand. Thanks for joining us, guys. See you next time.